So in some ways, this issue of how many is kind of a moot point. Becomes important for political reasons and resource division reasons. It's not necessarily that as important in practice or necessarily as important intellectually always. So you just write it in a way that you're as true as possible to your origins and the people that you drew from, and let people draw their own conclusion. If they choose to use it, that's great. If they don't choose to use it, you'll see another literature pop up in some ways. Anyone else? Because I want to close up on the first one and move on to the second one in a while. Siobhan, did you write on the first one as well?
I haven't, but I'm just having a thought about singular and plural. And I think it comes down to probably at what level you're going to look at it. And once again, it comes back to what you want to achieve. For example, when I did all the readings and looked at it, I thought of South Africa, and you've got your African South Africans, and then you've got what we call your white South Africans, Afrikaans and English speaking. Then do you want to develop a South African Indigenous psychology? Do you want to develop an African Indigenous? Do you want to develop a white South African? And then when you look at your African South Africans, there's 9 different big tribes. Of course, there's Hutu, Tswane, all sorts of different ones. And then once again, with what you want to achieve, are you going to break it down to what language you speak, what cultural practices, what religion or spirituality you have? I mean, where do you... The main thing is, as you said, what do you want to achieve? I think with, like in our country, lots of the reasons would be from my viewpoint, they seem very similar, but I'm pretty sure for those 9 different African tribes, they see themselves as probably different. But then they often get lumped together, and it is probably best for them to have, from my viewpoint, it might be so wrong, to have just one African Indigenous psychology, and that's purely for political reasons, and to achieve more.
Because to think of the implications, there's already tension between the Zulus, I know, who are the biggest and the strongest tribe, and the other tribes. So if you're going to put resources and official differentiation into Zulu, you are creating division, and you are creating very risky conditions for the future. So it's a political project, what you decide that you want to do. Whereas if you wanted to pursue African Indigenous psychology, again, it's a political project. So you're trying to strengthen now the formerly oppressed, disadvantaged group, and now you put a categorical difference with the formerly colonizing group. So with each one, you see what I'm saying? Each one of these is what do you want to achieve? What's your political project? What category is it that you are trying to reify? Reify make it hard, make it real. And you have to realize all of these categories are to some extent a social construction. And you're choosing which of these constructions that you are going to emphasize. That's not saying that these constructions don't have resonance, they're shared, but you have multiple ones that you can be drawing from. And South Africa is a perfect example where if you make the wrong choices, they can be catastrophic for your state, Zimbabwe being probably the most salient example of mobilizing a particular category at the expense of that other category, and then making political decisions and resource decisions on that basis that then have very far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, you've got to look at, is it truly for the survival of your own group, or is it to achieve more economic advancement, employment opportunities, all sorts of things? They're useful again. Is it purely for the passion of your people and you want to make sure that they survive, their language survives, the tradition survive, or is it because you melt with others just to make sure everyone gets ahead, otherwise everyone stays behind? So there's 2 choices there again.
That's right.
Just not easy.
That's right. And what you need to understand is why there's resistance to the Indigenous project is because in some ways the liberal democratic project is, as a political vision, is trying to solve the problems of people's primal divisions. You see, where the Liberal Democratic Project gained its greatest strength would be the two cases of France and the United States. So these are the two revolutions that produced liberal democracy. Both of them are, to a significant extent, homogenizing projects. So what they're trying to do is, France especially, is to create a central bureaucratic state where all the differences between people from Alsace and people from Paris and people from Toulouse were a little bit erased under this big project. This was Napoleon, that's what Napoleon did. So this is a very motivated project. And in some ways, that was to create this very strong and powerful state. And France is a powerful and prosperous state in comparison, for instance, to the Balkans, which chose to go this huge conflicting kind of way. And again, the United States, the model is citizen state. You see, so this kind of indigeneity discourses, they throw a bit of complexity into the machinery. But having said that, the machinery has always been built to try to accommodate difference. So in the US, what you have is states. Every state had a degree of sovereignty, especially in early American history. As it's become more than 200 years old, the federal government has become more and more powerful, and the states have become less and less powerful. But that there are legal rights that states have that the federal government does not have. So this was this kind of a homogenizing project, but then we will accept within this project that there's certain things that we're allowed to be indigenous and unique in the state, right? So in New Zealand, Maori have this special position from the treaty. In America, it's these states based on geographic location. In Switzerland, it's province, based on language and all this kind of stuff. So there's always some degree of accommodation between the superordinate, the thing that we're going to try to build into, but the fact that if you try to crush all of the diversity, it'll come back to bite you, which happened in that former Yugoslavia. So that former Yugoslavia, it had this communist discourse that we're all one. There's just the proletariat and the state, the citizen and the state, and it fell apart because it didn't have enough of a federal structure. And so the take-home message is that you can layer these things. It is this layered project. I don't think there's any one answer on this. Yeah? So I'd like at this point, just because we're almost towards the end, is to shift into that second question. We've already talked about the second question quite a bit, but if there's anyone that would like to add to the second question, because this is this kind of visioning question in terms of the steps in the process. Did anyone write in the second question that hasn't spoken yet would like to add something to it? Okay, who wrote on the second question? Okay, who wants to talk about it?
I found the idea of depowerment quite interesting. I haven't really fully formed it in my head, I don't think, but I wrote in my little thing that I kind of agreed with the concept of depowerment instead of empowerment, in the sense that I don't think necessarily mainstream psychology in New Zealand needs to be pushed down at all, but I feel like it almost needs to take a step back so that there's space for an Indigenous Māori psychology to